Um, Thank you for recording, also, Cumbia. While we're focusing on Cinco de Mayo, because unlike some other days, this is probably one of the most popular and widely known, albeit misunderstood, holidays. Next slide. And so a good place to start off is actually May 5th, 1862, um, with the actual Batalla de Puebla. This is one episode in a larger um, 6, 7 year war where the French Empire actually tried to establish another foothold in the Americas through Mexico. This was, again, one battle where Mexicans did beat the more resourced and better armed French Empire, and again, was a kind of rallying point for the broader Mexican nation to sustain the efforts. Um, Next slide, please. And some of the big themes that actually we can talk about when we focus on Cinco de Mayo are self-determination and nation building against imperialism. Again, this was a point where the Mexican nation was about 40 years old, and this was a firm kind of statement that Mexicans wanted to govern Mexico. Again, this is beyond a singular date, as I mentioned earlier. This was one day in a 2 month campaign to seize Puebla and in a 7 year war. Something that's also not really known is that the French actually attempted to invade Mexico in the late 1830s as well too, in what was called the Pastry Wars. It was a brief skirmish, but again, still um, an attempt for the French Empire to again colonize Mexico. And another big picture theme for all of this is there was a really direct racial and cultural superiority conversations. The French viewed at that time Mexicans as inferior. Um, and while that was one of the justifications for invasion, there was other wartime pressures such as yellow fever or unfamiliarity with the Mexican landscape as well too, that actually allowed a lot of kind of breakdown of some of the racial hierarchy for better and for worse. Like, for example, there were other folks throughout Latin America that joined both sides of the conflict. There was actually indigenous folks that also joined both sides of the conflict. And even in some limited instances, there was forced conscription and slavery from Africa to obtain more troops for the French side as well too. So while this is a broader kind of Mexican-French narrative, this is actually an international event. Um, Next slide. And so a lot of the point of entry for Cinco de Mayo is actually the celebration, right? I think everyone here has at least been to one event or, has definitely been aware that there are events that celebrate Cinco de Mayo in their own communities. And so again, we're at the point of 163 years past the initial Battle of Puebla, and yet we still see um, celebrations. And on the left, we have Cesar Chavez speaking at a Cinco de Mayo event. But again, on the top right, you see actually a screenshot from public access TV music special celebrating Cinco de Mayo, and you see an actual like in-person parade on the lower right in San Jose. So this is something that's been celebrated multiple different ways. Next slide. And again, too, these are probably some familiar scenes as well, too, where this has been one of the trademarks of kind of contemporary Mexican American culture. There's lots of dancing. The top right corner actually shows a Cinco de Mayo celebration planning committee based out of Texas as well, too. Um, but you see very strong kind of cultural dress components into the broader celebration. So this, in one way, has been a lens to exercise more cultural pride, while the event itself was based on a singular battle. But next slide. Um, this was also celebrated in the newspapers. And so what you see here are actually some of the very first mentions of the victory at Puebla as well too. So you see dated 22nd de Mayo, 1862 on the top left here. But again, this just to highlight, like this was huge news back in the day. And again, while some of the focus again has shifted, this has been again a really important rallying cry. And these actual print newspapers, again, in the absence of the internet, have were really important tools in actually communicating the message and inspiring more courage and resilience to fight the French. Next slide. And again, in the Chicano movement, you see actually a wave of strong wave of cultural reclamation as well too, where on the far left you see the iconography of Benito Juarez, who was the first indigenous president of Mexico and who led Mexico against the Spanish. You also see towards the middle the strong iconography of the Mexican eagle, and also on the far right you see some pretty awesome iconography for Pachuco styles and the counterculture as well too. So there was a really kind of interesting melding of modern Chicano Mexican American identity with more traditional um, Mexican culture here. And again, these are all Cinco de Mayo celebration posters as well. So again, just to show how this was also a uh, avenue for really vanguard artistic styles in the United States as well. But next slide, let's keep going here. Um, we've all so with this like rich culture, all right, we also see the reality of cultural appropriation, right? So, Mark mentioned uh, Taco Bell, which I love Chihuahuas, and you know, the Taco Bell Chihuahua was its own thing, but you also have like branded racist uh, characters like the Frito Bandito here on the lower right as well too. So this is actually kind of contrast to when Mexicans owned the ways of communication when it was kind of communicated by other people. You see really strong currents of racism and appropriation. Next. And so when we get into the importance of Puebla, right, this is actually, again, one day or one kind of battle, but the implications, I would argue, are actually worldwide. Um, so let's get into it in the next slide, please. So one of the core ways that modern historians argue for the importance of Puebla was that it delayed the French from incursion more on the northern side of Mexico, which, as an extension, would have allowed for a French and Confederate alliance, which again, many historians kind of argue that this might have shifted the course of the Civil War as well, too. So, in a way, right, like we say, hey, this is something that actually happened in Mexico, and it's Mexican history only. But actually, again, this was a really important delay that not only bought Mexicans more time, but also allowed for the U.S. Union, again, to continue its victory or encroachment on victory against the Confederacy here. Next slide. Something else also that's important for the course of Mexican history is that Cinco de Mayo contributed to the subsequent era of dictatorship. And follow me here. Um, so if Mexico during the Batalla de Puebla and against the war against the French was a conversation of exercising self-sovereignty, the period that followed after the French were defeated um, was very telling of what the status of Mexican society was. And there's two things to really take out of this. One is that the constant warfare supported a society dictated by militarism and folks in the military that were able to get political power. And these currents kind of collide with Porfirio Diaz, who became the dictator of Mexico. Um, he's a longstanding general in the Mexican army. He was actually captured at the Batalla de Puebla, and through a long series of events, eventually escaped French captivity. And he rode the kind of like excitement and political clout from this escape to again lead the Mexican army and ultimately defeating the French. Soon thereafter, however, um, he decided to not follow the Constitution, and I'm condensing things in a very small nutshell here, and actually led to some of the largest gaps of economic and social inequality in all of Mexican history. And this is really important because this set the social and historical context for the Mexican Revolution, which was to really take off in the year 1910. So the thread I'm trying to weave here is that actually Cinco de Mayo set up the culture for a larger, more impactful, and albeit deadly, internal civil war that was named the Mexican Revolution, which then led to more rights for um, indigenous communities and just more rights for Mexicans in general. Next slide. Um, and also, here at Green Latinos, we'd also be remiss to not tie the Cinco de Mayo uh, efforts for self-determination and sovereignty with the larger Latin American tradition of revolt and revolution as well too. And so this is a broader period in the history of the Americas where different cultures and different communities are fighting for self-determination. Um, so you have anywhere from Toussaint Louverture's revolution in Haiti, which was actually the first free country in the Americas outside of the United States, to the bottom right Zapatista movement based in, but not exclusively in southern Mexico. And then this, again, if you study the history of Latin America, it's essentially the history of revolutions as well too. And so like the way the Americas are won and independent and gain their independence is actually really leaning into fighting whatever was deemed as unjust and fighting for a better future, although there were definitely hiccups and challenges along the way. But we do want to tie this to a broader trend outside of kind of Mexican centricity here. Next slide. And as I mentioned as well too, this was a fragile wave of independence. And so on the far left here, you see Latin America in 1800, and all of the different European colony or European countries that had established colonies in the hemisphere. And just 30 years later, on the far right, you see how the colors have shifted, indicating that these countries were independent. So in about 30 years or so, you have the beginning of a reversal of about 300 years of colonialization to a broader trend of advancing um, justice and independence and social and human rights in the Americas. Next slide. Um, and also, again, here at Green Latinos, we'd also be remiss to not acknowledge that May 5th is also Missing and Murdered Indigenous Peoples Awareness Day. Again, too, this is something that's more felt in the United States as a kind of hotbed for resistance and bringing attention to disappeared indigenous people. But again, this is a larger trend that has accompanied the onset of European colonization in the Americas as well too. So we definitely want to, make sure that we're expressing solidarity beyond Puebla.
Yeah, so this was, I think, the original.
So
Oh,
they moved
sorry,
it
I think
over.
Rosemary Quinn, I think you're unmuted here. But happy that you're here. Um, And again, we want to make sure that we're expressing solidarity across communities and across cultures. That May 5th is actually a big day for a lot of folks as well too. So um, to keep us going, I want to make sure we go to the next slide. Um, and what some people might have anticipated as a pivot for this discussion is how the Trump administration affects Cinco de Mayo and Latinos and just broadly the preservation of history. So in the next 5 minutes or so before I pass it over to our featured guests, I do want to make sure I provide a kind of grounding for the rest of the today's conversation as well too. So on the far left, you'll see the infamous Taco Bowl tweet um, where Donald Trump was initially in his rise to power as a presidential candidate. Um, this image as well too kind of encapsulates a lot of the misunderstandings and oversimplifications of Cinco de Mayo, reduced to a taco bowl that was made in Trump Tower. Um, and actually, he retweeted this today. So he says, "This is so wonderful 9 years ago today." So what that's that. But also on the right-hand side of things, you see that this administration's illegal deportation um, campaign has also like affected the celebration of Cinco de Mayo. We've seen different events and whether anecdotally or officially confirmed that um, potential raids by ICE to a large, widely celebrated event like Cinco de Mayo was like a really big fear with our community. And so there were events that were canceled, um, nationwide as well too. So I think this is kind of another collision of like our cultural celebrations and spaces that were created by and for us also be affected by this administration's deportation campaign, which is, again, I would argue, removal and continues the campaign of erasure, not only of people, but also of this culture and stories that we preserve. Next slide. And so in this return to erasure, I'm going to bring up about 3 points of official actions from the administration. One is the Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History executive order that was announced a couple of weeks ago. It attacks the Smithsonian and lots of other historical institutions, but in some of the directives, it directs the Secretary of Interior to reinstate pre-existing monuments, memorials, and statues. So these are like Confederate monuments and monuments whose names have been changed because they had represented people and events that really perpetuated injustice. Um, and also make sure that they're reversing actions that tell a more inclusive and truthful American story as well too. So there's executive action to again, officially change the history of the United States here in our places and in our monuments and in our national museums. Next slide. Um, this is actually a leaked strategic plan for the Department of Interior that manages a lot of parks and historical sites as well too. And if you see right in the middle of key strategies, you see restore historic names, celebrate and commemorate America's 250th anniversary. And so the 250th anniversary is actually next year. And so there's a lot of like what counts as American history and what counts as stories worth telling is actually a very live national discussion right now as well too. There's a lot of other goals in here like reducing monuments and other nature sites that preserve and tell other cultural events and people's stories as well too. Next slide. And again, the president's budget was released, yes, last week. I was gonna say last year. It seems like a year. Um, but two of these points actually really indicate how the federal government is attempting to defund the institutions that tell and preserve our history. So the Historic Preservation Fund, which is one of the main funding sources for preserving and identifying sites, is again going to be, if they get their way, completely defunded. And also under a section called Small Agency Eliminations, they're proposing to end historic commissions and agencies like the 400 Years of African American History Commission, and also the Institution of Museum and Library Sciences. So again, this is like not so abstract anymore. This is actually a multifaceted campaign to again attack the institutions and places that tell our stories and represent our people. Next slide. And again, this is the last slide here, but I just want to make things very concrete to folks that all of these actions threaten the existing Latino heritage sites that are currently protected and identified in the United States. So as you can see here, there are different sites and historic trails in just about every corner of the country. There can be a little more in some places, but this just really demonstrates that Latinos have always been a part of the full American story as well too. So with that, I want to also save some time to pass it on to my colleague Seila Mota Casper, who's actually the one of the leading authorities in preserving Latino heritage sites and the stories they tell as well too. So thanks everyone so much for bearing with me. I hope this was a good foundation for the rest of this discussion. And without any further ado, I'll pass it over to Seila.
Great. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation, Pedro. And thank you to Green Latinos for putting this wonderful event together. And I'm just so excited to see the remaining portion of this and happy that you all are here with us holding space on this conversation. My name is Seila Mota Casper. I'm Executive Director of Latinos and Heritage Conservation. We are a nonprofit and the only nonprofit that advocates for the inclusion of Latinx heritage within historic preservation. I am based out of the Austin area, and I'm just really excited to explore nuestras historias and continue this conversation. So with that, I am going to do a screen share here. Great. Perfect. So first, I really just want to think about this and ask us, how is it that here in 2025, how did we get from Puebla? And here you see a map that has the old fortifications of the Battle of Puebla that Pedro talked about. How did we get from this in Mexico to this slide, which talks a few years later, about how there was this Mexican city that has some of its striking features, and it talks about Zacatecas and how the two republics came together to host a great Cinco de Mayo and a fiesta. So this was in the 1880s that this was published here. How did we get from that to the Dallas Morning News over this weekend? Ran an article that said, celebrate Cinco de Mayo in Dallas-Fort Worth with deals, specials, and parties. Margarita deals, festive food, and live roaming mariachi bands are part of the fun to expect in honor of the holiday in North Texas. And then here you see on the right-hand side, El Chingon in Fort Worth has incredible tacos, I will say, but this was part of the feature with Cinco de Mayo. And I think that part of this is that we just need to really begin to think critically about how it is that we went from Mexico, 163 years later, to the Cinco de Drinko, to Cinco de Mayo, to like this, diehard party culture that has become the weekend of Cinco de Mayo and Cinco de Mayo. So I really just want to start out with those questions and ask us to really think about how it was that we went from celebration in Mexico to a regional celebration in these small little pueblos throughout there. That when you saw Zacatecas. I also have a lot of articles from like Ciudad Mexico, Puebla, and just all around these regions where it was very regional. And throughout Mexico, it was not widely celebrated. This was very much has become an Americanized type of celebration. And it's an interesting evolution. So I kind of want to walk us through what Pedro shared for us and connect us to the conversation that we're here to discuss, which is really how did we get to this cultural appropriation or get to a space where we no longer are seeing this in the way that it was initially made. So here you see an image. This is Little Mexico in Dallas. And if you are familiar with Dallas-Fort Worth, this is in the Oak Lawn area, in the Victory Park area. There once was a barrio called Little Mexico, and up to nearly 20,000 Mexicanos moved here. And a lot of them came and sought refuge, like many other little pueblitos that came up along throughout the borderlands here in the United States, where people were fleeing tumultuous times. It was a Mexican Revolution, and violence occurred in 1910 throughout the teens. And it really was that moment that propelled hundreds of thousands of Mexicanos to come from Mexico into the United States seeking solace and peace, because they were in current conditions and current areas that were being targeted by the revolution itself. So not unknowing if these individuals were going to be, coming back the next week, within a week, this migration pattern, what we saw was mass migration. So it wasn't just like, my father coming to work and leaving my mom behind in Mexico. This was the entire family. Both parents came, all children came. The abuelita came, abuelos came, the tias came, the tios came, and families, if they were able to and lucky enough, would then all migrate together into these different little pueblitos throughout the United States. And we called them colonias, barrios, little Mexicos. And I know, because I studied these throughout the country, like you probably have one, right, in your hometown that you had. And most of these were popped up in the teens, and that's because of the Mexican Revolution. So with that, what we know is that, like here in Texas, we had these thriving communities of Mexicanos that came together, and there were barbershops, there were, hair shops, there were, panaderias, there were tortilleras. Here you see a grocery market. Just the evolution and industry that came together within these pueblos, individual and gente, they came and made new lives for themselves. And so here they were, and just really beginning to seek out who they were in this space. Here in Dallas, as you're seeing here, this went from being a historical Jewish, then Black community to the Mexican community. And it was a colonia, and then later on rebranded decades later to Little Mexico. So what happens whenever we all come together and we've left our homeland and we left like our motherland, and we don't have, everything that we had before? You really find individuals that are beginning to seek community, to seek identity, to begin to commune amongst each other, and to have what we now call Latinidad and y cultura. And so part of this work of these barrios that were coming out were a lot of these celebrations and a lot of moments that were surrounded around fiestas patrias. So patriotic festivals, Cinco de Mayo being one of them, Día 16 being another one. These were two strong center points and staples within comunidades throughout the entire United States. And so in the teens and in the 20s and the 30s, you begin to see this evolution of communities that are beginning to have so much time together, solidarity together, and bringing people together. And yes, wearing traditional wear, as you can see here, of their homeland states. 1939, Dallas Morning News, 4 Mexican states were represented in costumes. So each of them are celebrating the history and where, they came from. In 1942, on the right-hand side, you'll see Cinco de Mayo celebrations, and this is part of the programming. There's some official things. You see patriotic things, not only patriotism towards Mexico, but also patriotism towards the United States. You'll see a lot of these have the iconography of, it'll have like a lot of the iconography that goes back to Battle of Puebla, but then also begins to tie us to our new identities here in the United States with having the backdrop of the United States flag, as you see there. Here's another one here. This photo is, I think, in the 30s. Let me see here. I'm missing my notes. In the 30s. And here, same thing. It's Little Mexico. And in Little Mexico, you see that they're having food traditions here in the 30s. And women would come and they would cook their most prideful, like, I mean, every mom and every abuela, right, has their dish. Every mom y abuela brought their dish to showcase their food and proudly share that with the community there. And then families would come and celebrate and hold space for one another and be able to come together. Again, these moments of celebration, yes, it was started out with the Battle of Puebla, but what we see is a cultural landscape that begins to evolve in the United States, where we're beginning to seek Latinidad and comunidad, and this is the way that we were able to fortify that. Some other examples here, 1948. Here we see young children. We see Antonia y Joseph, 12 and 8 years old, dancing. So they're in traditional wear, and also not only are they wearing traditional wear here, but they're also learning intangible cultural things such as danza. Again, on the right-hand side, you see singers. So canteras are singing, and they were part of the Cinco de Mayo celebration in 1962. Here is a few other examples. In 1931, coming out of Pasadena, patriotic Mexicans plan to celebrate El Cinco de Mayo. And then it talks about in here about Cinco de Mayo being Mexican independence tonight. So they're celebrating here Mexican independence, and it says there's going to be music, there's Mexican and American flags side by side. Again, patriotism, showing that we are both from here and there. And so this was 109 years after it. What I think is so interesting, and one thing that I want you to look out for, is in the early history and records, what we see is that the conversation around the Battle of Puebla, the conversation about a revolution taking place, the conversation about pride and patriotism, all of the things that we know to come out of the Battle of Puebla, which really boosted morale, right, and national pride, those are part of these stories. And we're going to see that through the 1950s and 60s. If my PowerPoint wants to play nicely. All right, so here we go. San Francisco. San Francisco. Here we go again. So here's another one out of San Francisco. It talks about El Paso, and it also talks about here, if you've seen that middle paragraph, it talks about that here, Texas Plains, Mexicans from across the Rio Grande, all dressed in their fantastic wear, that it brings in various different individuals. And here they liken it to the Mexican 4th of July or Cinco de Mayo. Again, now maybe this narrative isn't correct, but we're tying it back still historically to a battle and a celebration and a commemoration. And you still see that string line go through in this example. Again, here we go as well. Here's a 1924 example out of California, and then another one of Arizona. Same thing. You'll see the celebrations in both of them. You will also see how it is that, like on the right-hand side, it says, throughout Mexican settlements of the district, the holiday spirit reigns supreme in preparation for tonight's gaiety. Community dances, patriotic speeches, and entertainment will be featured in celebration. Again, I cannot stress enough how important it is that we continue to tie and the news stories continue to hold on strong to the very reason why Cinco de Mayo is here in the United States. And while, like in this example, it's 1924 and we're 40 years removed away from the Battle of Puebla, again, what has become is a fiesta patria. So we're now holding on to the cultural fabric of who we are in North America and tying that back to our identity, y Latinidad in Mexico. So we're continuing, like if you grew up, like I'm first gen and my family, like so many prideful moments, right? When anything happened. And I did not grow up celebrating this because my parents were they're recent, immigrants. So I didn't have this type of experience. But as a historian, I just continue to ask the question and want to remind us of that tie historically of what exactly we had on us. And then I want to share here a video. There's no audio to it, but this was here. This is a new story that came out of Dallas Fort Worth. And here, let's hit play. This is in the 50s. And you'll see a lot of young individuals here, having festive, they're partying. This is Little Mexico. You see the Mexican flag here. You see the American flag here, again, patriotism. Zaragoza, again, honoring this huge feat and what, he became revered towards. And then you see individuals here, they're all partying and drinking. We're playing games. It's a huge, we're playing bingo. This is probably a date night. The littles are there. It's a big family celebration. And then you also have dignitaries that are talking during this event. So it was a festival. It was a big event. It was very wholesome. And it's something where we all came together to celebrate one another and just celebrate being in comunidad y latinidad. So that was in the 50s. And then here, this is the transcript from that 1951 again. So this is, we've gone now through the 1880s, and here we are in 1951. I'm not going to go through and read it, but I just want to point out that it does talk about, again, tying the Battle of Puebla and Napoleon and the French army coming in, and really tying that to Zaragoza then being able to be there, and that they were able to take away and win this battle in 1951. This is the story that ran in Dallas Fort Worth on the news. And so there we are. And recently my nieces, I was telling them about this presentation and how I had to prep for it this weekend. And they were like, what is Cinco de Mayo? Like, I don't know what Cinco de Mayo is. And I was like, that is a great question. Like, how did we get from everything that we just walked through to all the way here? And if you've heard me talk about this before, you know how I just really feel that this day has been commodified, commercialized. And what we know to be true, as Mark brought up, is in the 80s and the 90s, different organizations and companies like Anheuser-Busch ran the most profitable marketing strategies, and realizing early on that Latinos had buying power. So all of a sudden, in the 80s and in the 90s, you're going to begin to see this evolution of, oh, Cinco de Mayo isn't this patriotic event. Like, yes, there was tequila that was there, but that ties to our indigenous roots, and mezcal ties to our indigenous roots. But they took it in a total different area. And all of a sudden, the margarita, which was, you can argue that it was created in the teens all the way into 1971, whether it was El Paso or Dallas or Juarez. I don't know. You can ask every historian. We all own the margarita. But I will say that now margarita is like so hand in hand with Cinco de Mayo, which is another way that our culture has been appropriated, especially when we think about our indigenous ties to land, y tequila, y mezcal. So now here we are, that all of this time now, and over this past year, what we know to be true is that on Cinco de Mayo, over $600 million worth of alcohol is sold, which is more than St. Patrick's Day and more than Super Bowl. So we went from the Battle of Mexico y Puebla all the way up to Cinco de Mayo, and us beginning to expand who we are in the United States, feel who we are in the United States, be able to celebrate Latinidad y cultura to this. So I just ask us to really think about this and to think about the way that we can continuously challenge this narrative, how it is that we can shift this narrative, reimagine what Cinco de Mayo is, take back exactly what it used to be from a lot of these marketers who are prospering significantly from our own cultural heritage, and just begin to think how we can preserve our stories as an act of resistance, especially around any type of fiestas like Cinco de Mayo. So I am going to stop here. Thank you so much for your time, and I will pass it back over to Pedro.
Thank you so much, Sayla. As always, that was a very powerful and thorough presentation. And yeah, I love the use of newspapers. For a quick point, is historians love newspapers. Um, and newspapers have been a really important way of you know, previous to social media and everything, conveying news. But that's actually a really good segue to our next featured speaker, Christian Lamont, who is an expert master Jedi in storytelling with organization Latino Outdoors. So, Christian, the floor and the mic are yours, and take it away.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Pedro, Val, Mark, Cumbia, Eder, Olivia, all the Green Latinos team. Cela, it's fantastic. I'm going to do a screen share, so bear with me for 2 seconds. Right. Okay. Can everybody see this? Fantastic. So I'd also like to start out acknowledging missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives. It's important that we share these 2 days, and as we lift up one and talk about the erasure and the pain that we've gone through, just as important as Pedro mentioned earlier to remember those who are no longer with us and to say their names and to remember them whenever we get the chance. All right, so a little bit about me. This is a picture of my great-great-grandfather, the one on the left, the very serious looking one. We called him affectionately El General, or we referred to him as El General, because he was. As you can see on the left-hand side, de las horas de la prueba de la revolución. And those are a bunch of young men about to go fight in the Mexican Revolution. They fought in the Mexican Revolution against the forces of Victoriano Huerta. And my great-grandfather, on the left again, fought next to Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas on his right, on both the older and the newer photos. And they fought alongside each other because they believed in the power of making change, in the power of fighting for their people, for their lands, and for their history. And one thing I wanted to show is this is a picture of my great-grandfather in the middle, my grandfather on the left, and my father, Alfredo Lamont, Alfredo Lamont, Alfredo Lamont. And I share that because the picture on the right is a photo of my father, Alfredo Lamont, with my brother, Alfredo Lamont, and me, the little squirt right there on the left. And so when we talk about history, when we talk about revolution, when we talk about the Mexican Revolution and Cinco de Mayo, and the threads and the people and the powers that were fought, it's actually, for a lot of people, not that far away. That absolutely dates me. I'm old. I'm older. But I wanted to share that these photos, these artifacts, these newspaper clippings, these antiques that we look at in a digital medium are not so far-fetched and so far removed from what we're dealing with today. And it's thanks to the digital medium, thanks to this webinar, thanks to you all, that we're able to put these pieces together in a visual way. So a little bit about that squirt on the right-hand picture. My personal story: I was born in Mexico City, grew up in Colorado, and I've lived in Los Angeles most of my life. I am proud to work with Latino Outdoors in our Yo Cuento storytelling and communications and advocacy program. And I'll go over real quick about a little bit about Latino Outdoors and our programs, not too much. So this is Latino Outdoors. That squirt in the previous picture, you'll see on the left-hand side, he's grown up a little bit, got a beard, but there he is. And we've got our 3 programs. One is the Vamos Outdoors, literally let's get these wonderful, beautiful, diverse people outside and our communities. Then we've got our Crecemos Outdoors, which is let's give them skills, let's teach them things. And then we've got our Yo Cuento, which is the one that I'm a part of. And Yo Cuento is about expanding the narrative of outdoor engagement so that it's a more rich and representative of the diverse community of people who love and care for the outdoors. Yo Cuento, a lot of us Spanish speakers know that Yo Cuento means I count, I tell a story, I matter. And that's incredibly important today as we're talking about Cinco de Mayo. It counts, it matters, it's telling a story. And so we talk about the way that these tie together. And so Vamos Outdoors, you know, this is fostering outdoor engagement, which leads to personal stories of connection to the outdoor. These stories then are amplified through Yo Cuento Outdoors, reaching a wider audiences and inspiring new and renewed outdoor engagement. In turn then, Vamos Outdoors program participants and Yo Cuento audience members often become inspired to join ELO's volunteer network. Then they have the opportunity to develop their outdoor leadership capacity through Crecemos Outdoors while contributing to the impact of both Vamos and Yo Cuento Outdoors. And so a quick history of storytelling. This is going to be fast, but storytelling is as old as human beings. It started around the fires, and it started before the fires. Then we talked about the harvests. We talked about the stars. We talked about what was in the stars. We talked about good hunts and bad hunts. We talked about droughts. We talked about the climate and the weather. Then we used the campfire as a place to gather around and to share these stories. And then we started putting these stories into formats. It wasn't just the oral, it wasn't just the verbal. It started becoming song, it started becoming tattoos and art, it started becoming buildings and structures, it started becoming beadwork, it started becoming a whole lot more. And so while we talk about the formats of storytelling, I think it's important to draw this line between all of this that our ancestors did and still do, that we've carried on. But it's also important to know that when we're talking about newspapers and then into this digital era, into the flyers and leaflets that the revolutionaries of Cinco de Mayo had, that we are still passing around flyers and leaflets. We're still engaging each other in these multiple formats. And so one of the things with Latino Outdoors that we like to do is we think of our frameworks, the connecting people to people, connecting people to process, connecting people to the place, and connecting people to policy. And the policy one is super important. I mean, they're all important. They feed into each other, literally. But lately, we've been talking about the policy one a whole lot. And that is where we're seeing these national monuments under threat, where we're seeing these historical places being under threat, where we're seeing names being erased, where we're seeing news every single day about threats to these places. And how can we possibly fight back? How can we possibly push back and speak up and be together and use our voices, use the power of storytelling to preserve and to protect some of these places, and also not just the places, but the people and their stories behind these places. So I was sharing with Pedro recently that I was talking to one of our team members, and we were talking about a blog, and it was a very casual conversation. It was, hey, I'd like to write a blog about a trail in New Mexico. And, you know, a few years ago, you say like, okay, yeah, write the blog. But this one prompted a further conversation, which was, it not only is it important for you to write the blog, but as every day we're seeing headlines of websites being erased, of digital artifacts, of actual physical artifacts being removed, being taken out of museums, being changed to fit a certain narrative that may not reflect all of ours. It's as important as ever to think of blogs as important, as more important than you ever have before, because they are places where you can preserve your history. There are places where we can name names that may not be named on a federal and larger level. And so what started off as a conversation about a blog started turning into a conversation about a way to protect history. We are going to name this place. We are going to talk about why it's important to our culture. We are going to preserve it in the Latino Outdoors blogosphere, into our blog series. And so that's just a baby example of the power that we have as individuals to think of places, to name them, and then to protect their memory. Without the help of the federal government right now, without the help or hindrance of others. We can do this ourselves. So then, this also prompted another memory that we went to Blackwell, the Blackwell School in Marfa, Texas. I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's a memory of a segregated school. We saw the desks, we saw these places, the literal burying of the Spanish language, artifacts there that showed how at one point the Spanish-speaking students were told, forget your language, it's dead, bury it. The erasure of our history, the erasure of our identity. And being there in real life was incredibly powerful. But I've got to be honest, I learned about it through social media. And so I want to talk a little bit about the power of our voices. I want to talk a little bit about the power of social media and of dancing and of joy and celebration and using these platforms in ways that we can share with others. So there was a study a couple of years ago with U.S. Forest Service back then, and you can read here. But ultimately, what it says is that storytelling and social media can work as mechanisms to develop trust. And it allows us to share our feelings. It allows us to share our reactions to places. It builds a sense of community. It encourages a feeling of responsibility for and identity with the environments they're a part of. So there's a sense of buy-in. And so when we go to these places, we feel this awe, or we feel the heat of the desert, or we feel the cool of the mountains or of the stream. And it gives us a connection. And it is very important for us to feel this connection on our own. But we can't just keep it to ourselves. It's also important to get this out and to share it with others and to build community through sharing this with others. And so social media is a powerful tool. The algorithm is fighting us. Like Benito Juarez and his troops, well, maybe not exactly like it, but we can fight back in our own way through collaborations, through information, through smart use of our privacy, through the power of storytelling, by celebrating our stories, by celebrating our people. When days are being erased off of calendars, when names are being changed to places that we know and that we love, we need to call on each other. We need to call on you to not be passive as a viewer, but to be an active part of movements like this, be an active part of movements like Take Back Cinco de Mayo. So it's important to share your stories, to interview your family, to organize, to protect the places you love, the stories of our people, and to capture the urgency of now. And so what are some of the ways that you can preserve your histories and your stories? Oral histories. You've got to talk, you've got to share. You've got to share stories, and somebody in the group can say, oh, God, I've heard this 5 times. That's okay. What you're actually doing is continuing that story. What I did at the beginning of this presentation was continue the name of my great-grandfather and his legacy and what he fought for. I continued and I said the name of my grandfather and my father and my brother. And I was able to say their names out loud, the pronunciation, those things that get lost. They get forgotten to time. And so you can each honor in your oral histories around the dinner table. Repeat that joke. Grab somebody else. Repeat it to them. Tell them about that camping adventure. Tell them about that trip to DC or to some other advocacy place that you did. Something you did in conservation. Another way that we can preserve our story is through musical heritage. We had when we celebrated our 10-year anniversary, we commissioned a song from a Latino outdoors volunteer, Brian Rodriguez. And he went out and he listened to the sounds of nature, and he was inspired. And he said, this also speaks to me on a personal level. This isn't just a song. This is something that means something to me and to my family. Culinary traditions. Literally last week or 2 weeks ago, we went on a camp out where one of our team members, Luisa, shared a family meal and the recipe. And so by that way, she was able to pass on her family's tradition to the rest of us. Rituals and celebrations. You know, I know a lot of us are starting to do ofrendas. My grandma, before she passed away, she was like, I like this. This is so nice to see you doing this. And it's something that she'd done as a young girl, but it kind of came back up and it's gained this new strength, this new popularity. You can go to more places and find things for the ofrendas. But it's not just about the ofrenda. It's about learning about the cultural and the physical elements, the natural elements, the salt, the earth, why, the candles, the water, what's so important about them. Digital storytelling is another way of preserving our stories. Doing this, but on your own. Host your own webinars. Host your own IG lives. Get your friends together. If you've got a Twitch channel, if you've got YouTube, get on there, push record, and just talk. So what if you have the audience of one? It is a legacy. You are protecting and you're preserving your history. Short form documentaries are also incredibly important. There are so many resources, so many tools. You can go to your library to make it more accessible. You can go to your library and say, hey, can I check out a room? And with your phone, I guarantee you that if anybody has a phone past 2013, the quality is good enough. The quality is good enough. The best camera is the camera you have with you. And so check out a room at the local library. Jot down some questions. Take your mom, take your dad, take your abuelita, your abuelito if they're still around, and ask them some questions. Who are you? What was your favorite food when you were growing up? What's your favorite song? Save these histories. What's a space that is important to you? And then use social media as our digital campfire. We can use it as a place to gather. And so while we make these connections in real life, while we make kinship and connections in real life, it's also important to keep connecting with everybody. So it's incredibly important to get up here, to do this, to go on a hike, to meet people, to be with them. But it's also important to share information, to learn a little bit more about where that space was. It's important to get the connections of these people and to follow them and to build your own community and say, hey, I know that this isn't a Latino Outdoors or GreenLatinos event this time. Maybe can we go hiking on our own? Hey, maybe there's a movie, there's a concert, there's a gallery. Let's go together. And then, so when you share it, it's not just sharing to yourself. It's also pushing back against the algorithm. And I'll get back to that in a second. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say that there is a strategy behind all of this digital storytelling, behind all of this emphasis to get out your your stories and to protect places and to name them. That's as important as anything. Name them and remember them. There is strategy and there's a theme, and there's also heart and community. And so I'd like to share with everybody this thought from our social media, naming our theme this year of love and community. Because as we go into this work, we have to make it sustainable for ourselves. As we push back, as we do resistance, active resistance and naming and history keeping, we have to make it sustainable for ourselves. We have to take care of each other. And so our theme this year is love and community, amor y comunidad. Because love can be tender, but it can also be fierce. Community can be your chosen community. The people you gather with at your GreenLatinos encuentros, people you gather with on the trail, on webinars, in real life. And we have to use these moments and these movements like this to come together, to be beautiful, to be different, to be diverse, and to be counted as one. So, con amor y comunidad. Con amor y comunidad, we protect our people, our friends, our families, the planet, and public lands that bring us peace, health, sustenance, joy, and healing. Con amor y comunidad, we celebrate the beauty of diversity, the urgency of equity, and the power of inclusion. Con amor y comunidad, we are planting the seeds of a bright and sustainable future, full of joy, full of life, full of laughter, full of you, full of love. Con amor y comunidad, estamos aquí y seguiremos aquí. We are always, always stronger together. It's Cinco de Mayo. We're already talking about it. Let's come together. Let's shape and reshape the narrative to protect our stories and to share our stories. And so, in closing, I just want to say our parents and their parents as immigrants grew up with a type of just work hard and keep your head down attitude and ethic. And I respect that, and it was necessary for what they were going through. They had to. We owe it to them to reclaim our stories. We owe it to them to reclaim our joys, our songs, to create new ones. We owe it to them to remember and honor spaces and places and histories of our people. We owe it to them to reclaim Cinco de Mayo. Now, here are 5 actions that you can do to take to help protect the histories of the spaces and the people that you care about. Write a blog. It doesn't have to be for Yo Cuento. Write a blog. I challenge you all. Sit down with a family member, send them 10 questions. Post it on social media. It has to exist somewhere outside of your email. Record on YouTube. You don't need a camera. You don't need a studio. You can literally go onto YouTube and push record, and you can talk about the things that are important to you. Pass on those oral histories. Don't forget those people. Don't forget those places. Teach others. Pass it on. And take photos. These things are artifacts. They are memories. That way, in 50 years, 100 years, 175 years, when the future Pedros are doing Take Back Cinco de Mayo webinars, they have artifacts they can share. They say, look at this grainy photo from way back then. Oh my goodness, it was 2D and in color. How quaint. But it is history, and they will be able to look back and know the names of the places and the people who are trying to make a difference and who are fighting and calling on us to reclaim Cinco de Mayo. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate you all.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Christian and Selah. Please, everyone, give a digital round of applause to our wonderful speakers here. And fun to hear you talk, Christian. But yeah, we have about 10 minutes left together. And so I want to still make some time for any questions from the audience. As well too for our featured speakers as well too. So if there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can kind of get to them in the remaining time that is allowed. but I want to make sure we allow that space if anyone does have any questions or kind of if there has been anything that has been sparked in this conversation. Um, I'm seeing a comment as well too that this was my first time joining a Green Latinos event and this was amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. Um, that really does mean a lot. We do try to shape our programming based on the needs and priorities of our members and community as well too. Um, and so I have a question here. How are programs funded? I'm gonna maybe assume that's some of the programming for our organizations. And I think Eileen, if I'm not mistaken, also, I think maybe you had asked a question earlier if there was any government funding as well too for any of this preservation work or anything else. So maybe we can pass it around to our speakers here. I can at least say that Green Latinos is a mix of foundation grants, individual donors as well too. And there was a government grant for urban greening. Um, but maybe Selah then Christian.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I'm also gonna put this in the chat right now. Latinos and Heritage Conservation, we have so many different ways to help you document and preserve your own histories. And I echo everything that Christian said. Incredible presentation. Capture those stories. We created the Abuelas Project to capture these stories, free archive, open source. We see it as being something that is going to be a site identification and story identification from community up, all the way up to grants, which is on this question. So y'all check out our website, please. So as far as programming, usually whenever people ask this, it's like, how are we being funded? But then also, how are we funding this work? I would say that previous to this administration, funding was easier to get. I would look at things like humanities grants. Each state has a humanities arm. I know that has been threatened, but now we have some private foundations like the Mellon Foundation that is supplementing $15 million to humanities programs that have been cut at the state level. The National Park Service also has funding. Those, as of right now, are kind of in limbo, but stay tuned. And then all the way up to, I've been a fundraiser now for 20 years for all of my projects. And the best way to get your projects funded is to look in your backyard and see what foundations are there, what organizations are there, what nonprofits are there, because they want to fund in their backyard. But as for me, as an organization, we are super excited to have been the recipients of Mellon Foundation funding. We've received 2 rounds now, so that's how we're funded. They are funding our Borderlands expansion project. So all of these projects that I just put in there, they are funding that along with other foundation sources. Thankfully, we don't rely heavily on federal funding. So we're in a really good place right now and feeling grateful. So I'm going to stop there and I'll pass it on to Christian.
Hello. Yes, so we're kind of in a similar situation as we navigate the times, this era, this epoch. And we're luckier than some in terms of not receiving a lot of funding from the federal government. That being said, we do have grants. We receive funding. A big partner of ours is the Waverly Street Foundation. We have a lot of the Schmidt Family Foundation, and I think a lot of what we're beneficiaries of is brands that reach out to us, and you get to meet good-hearted people behind the scenes. I know that a lot of the forward things are rife with this kind of capitalistic sense of like, oh, but But the truth is, all of us, every small organization, every club benefits from these kinds of partnerships. And then you build strong relationships with the human beings that are championing your cause behind the scenes. And these relationships grow for years and years. And so again, we're luckier than many right now in terms of funding, but it is a constant work. It is a constant balance, and what we always do is we thoughtfully challenge folks not to consider us a check on a box, not to consider us a token anything. We're proud people. We are a community that wears its heart on its sleeve and our logo on our chest. And so we go into the conversations, and sometimes if we have to say no, we do. And we do it with good faith. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I see, I think we have time for one more question. And so in one sentence, if that's fair at all, um, there was a question from Olivia of how do you imagine Cinco de Mayo being recognized in 100 years from now? So pass it to Christian and then Selah.
Okay. My one word would be accurately. Um, yeah, it's going to take time. We're going to have to undo the marketing juggernaut that was the 80s and 90s and early aughts. So we're already starting, and it will take time. Hopefully in about 50, 60 years, we will have erased the Drinko de Cinco offensive stereotype kind of thing, and people will say like, it was a battle. It was a historical day. It was a battle that happened. We're wrong. This is Mexican Independence Day. Has nothing to do with this. And hopefully it will be a day of action where conservationists can come in, where people can say like, hey, it's Cinco de Mayo. Have you called your representative? Hey, it's Cinco de Mayo. Have you done a volunteering service today? Hey, it's Cinco de Mayo. Remember, it's also Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Day. So hopefully in 100 years, we will celebrate it and we'll recognize it accurately.
Thanks. Selah?
Yeah, I'll also add reclamation, reclaiming, as one of the things that has hit me so much over the last few years as I've been thinking about Cinco de Mayo is how I've seen this evolution and how it's gotten away from us. And it's so similar to the way that dominant narratives play out and really erasing the parts of our histories that are central to our communities. So I would say that just reclaiming exactly where we came from and going back to a time where we saw in the examples earlier, where 100 years ago, there was a lot going on with, Latinidad and centering this on cultura and on people and on community unity. So I just foresee a time when we get back to that place again.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Christian and Selah. And so to wrap up our time together as well too, just want to remind everyone to feel free to click on all of the links that have been dropped so far from our speakers. We'll be sending everyone who registered a roundup of resources and action items based on our Take Back Cinco de Mayo campaign as well too. So I'm going to drop our membership become a member link in the chat as well too while Cumbia hits us on the next slide. So really quick and again, and everyone will receive the links and resources for these action items as well too. But we have a community petition as well too that we're hoping everyone here is interested in signing on to and circulating as well too. We have about 1,000 folks and dozens of organizations throughout the country supporting our call to reclaim our culture. Next slide. As well, Christian did a great job in overviewing some very concrete steps we can all take in shifting our narratives as well too on social media and any channels and spaces that we occupy. Next slide. We'll also be sending a comment form to protect the monarch butterfly and make sure that it's protected under the Endangered Species Act as well too. Comments are due May 19th, and again, the monarch is another cultural connection that we have to nature and an important storytelling mechanism as well too. So that's being dropped in the chat as well. And finally, if we can get one more slide, Cumbia. One of the best ways to be connected with these calls to action in general is to become a GreenLatinos member. This is where you'll have direct access to job opportunities, action alerts, and also our issue area specific colectivos, which are like-minded folks who care about public lands and oceans or sustainable communities or climate action as well too. So if you're looking for a space to build affinity and take action on issues that you care about, please become a member. And finally, if I can get our very last slide of our encuentro, Cumbia, if you can get us. Yeah, again, I want to wish everyone a happy Cinco de Mayo. Thanks so much for hanging out with us and, learning so much as well too. We really try to provide resources and educational material, again, that meets the needs of our members and of our community. And if we were able to do that at least a little bit and inspire change for how we connect to our culture, then, that really means the world to us. So thank you so much, everybody. Hope you have a good rest of your day. And again, happy Cinco de Mayo. So take care, everyone. And
Gracias.
we'll be sharing the recording.